Hello, everybody, and welcome to our ERISA webinar and virtual education series. I'm delighted to monitor this session or moderate this session with my dear friend Nicole Dogan. I just wanted to share a little bit about ERISA. Our mission is ERISA is a multidisciplinary geospatial organization that provides professional education and training, a vibrant and collected community, advocacy for geospatial challenges and issues, and essential resources. ERISA fosters excellence in GIS and engages geospatial professionals throughout their careers. So Nicole Dogan is a senior GIS analyst for the town of Flower Mound, right? You can't say city, you have to say town. Is that correct?
Correct.
She holds a master's degree in geographic information sciences from the University of Texas at Dallas. She is also a GISP, and she mentors at Marcus High School, which is a local high school to the Flower Mound area in Louisville. And I have personally known Nicole for probably over 23 years. I met you when you worked with Paul Sill at MSI or Marconi. So I love this topic. Lord knows I can benefit from creating a worthy presentation, and I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us. For the audience, if you can hold off or add all your questions, and there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Also, next to Q&A is chat. So whatever your flavor is, you can put your questions there. We'll be monitoring those. And we'll probably hold off on questions and answers till the very end. I'll monitor the questions. If there's something that, if we feel like we need to stop and kind of have that answered right away, we'll do it. But for the most part, we'll have plenty of time at the end to kind of have a nice discussion. And Nicole, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tim. As Tim said, my name is Nicole Dogan, and I work for the town of Flower Mound. I've been here nearly 21 years, which seems like a long time. Seems like I should be ready to retire, but I'm not yet. So if I sound a bit funny to you, it's me. I'm originally from Australia. It's not your audio machine. If I look kind of sparkly, well, that could be your machine, maybe. So I think this is a topic that is near and dear to most of us. We've all sat through presentations that were either really good, where you're thinking about them afterwards for a long time, or ones that were really bad that you got into and you were really excited, but then it didn't deliver exactly as you had hoped. And I think we all would like to give good presentations, and there's some interesting things that we can do to try and make that happen. On the side of GIS, in my spare time, my social life is Toastmasters. I've been doing Toastmasters for a couple of years. And with Toastmasters, the goal is to improve public speaking and leadership roles. And so I've been doing that for a couple of years. This year, I'm an area director, and I really like it. And I see that I've made a lot of progress, but I also see there's a whole lot further I can go. So I'm definitely not an expert in this, but I know a few tricks. And just like all technical presentations, we've already had hiccups. So I'm reading my notes off paper because I can't get my screens to sync up. So if I look like I'm not paying attention, that's why. So the first thing with presentations is get there early. If you're in person, you can get to know your audience a little bit. If it's online or you're using any technology, you can test it ahead of time. So even though I was really organized ahead of time, it still had some issues, and we had to call the IT department in to come and help. So if you can get there early. One thing I think it's important to remember for us is that we're already visual communicators. Once I connected that, I was like, okay, this isn't so bad. It's just the speaking. We're used to putting images together and trying to communicate with visual maps. And that, I think that gives us a bonus, a head start on other folks being able to communicate with maps and put a presentation together. So I think about the story you're trying to tell, just like if you're putting back together a map, you can throw something together, but then you need to look and think, does that answer what I was trying to put out there at the beginning? I know I've had maps before where I've made them for a battalion chief in one case. And when he came to pick them up, he explained, I'd made exactly what he asked for, and he explained why he was using those maps and what he was wanting to sell to the rest of the department. And I went away, and I remember sitting the next day on the exercise bike at the gym, and I was thinking, that didn't tell the story he was wanting to tell. So by the time the battalion chief got in, there was an email and 9 more maps saying, I think this explains better and this will work better for you. This is the same way in a presentation. Once you get all your notes down, you get your slides together, look back. Have you got across what you were aiming to get across? Because you know what you're wanting to do the most, what you're wanting to get across. I like to ask people how to phrase their questions, to do it at the beginning or at the end, or if you want them interrupting. That tells your audience then what you're expecting from them and how you're going to answer. So today I'm going to look at different types or categories of, 2 different types of categories of presentations. One is a narrative. That's a story. Mostly I think I don't do narrative presentations, but certainly there is the call for that. And that would be like a story map. You know, you're going through a set of steps trying to progress and have a final outcome where you've told the people what you want to tell them, and then you've led to a conclusion at the end. You're conveying an idea. You're building your slides towards an actionable idea at the end of your story. The second category is informative. And now that I'm looking at this, I'm sure this is not actually the slideshow that I'm wanting to.
It's fine. We see informative. And
okay.
then there's a bullet that says
well, and it could be fine. I just think it's not the final one. I think that's what's on this screen. I think it's a different PowerPoint. So we'll go with it. But thank you. The second type of presentation is an informative presentation. So it could be persuasive. You're trying to sell your team on why they should be doing something a certain way. Demonstrative, if you're giving a presentation on how to do a software update. These are all going to be completely different, but it's an informative presentation. Now I've lost my mouse. Problem solving. How do we get to the end of something? Working through steps. Okay, now, sorry. So the narrative, you're coming to a conclusion at the end. And I like to always finish with your contact details, because I think there might be other people out there like me that are going to think of things tomorrow in the shower and think, oh, I've just connected. I want to reach out and say, how do you do that? Or how did you do this? So I think that's a good way of doing it. The same with an informative. And a good way to start is to have a hook for both a narrative or an informative. So in this case, my hook is, have you been to presentations which were either really great or were not really great and wanted to adapt your presentation style? And for me, that would be enough of a hook. And I know I've gone to some presentations where the hook was the title, and I was thinking, that's something I'd be really interested in. And then I've got there and actually the presentation was a little bit lacking, and I wish there was more information or they were able to do a better presentation. So I'd like the hook to start with, and then for informative, this works well for me. But you may find it does or it does not. You can adjust it for yourself. To tell you what I'm going to tell you. So I'm going to talk about today different types of presentations, the components of the different presentations, things that you will and won't do, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer. So I've told you what I'm going to tell you, and I'll do that in more detail. And then in the body, you go through all of those steps, talk about the types, expand on those points, talk about the types of presentations, the content in a presentation, the components and the do's and don'ts that you would go through. And in the conclusion, I like to wrap it up again. And I think it helps if you have numbered points, like we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. It makes it easier for your audience to follow along. Okay, that was point 1, point 2, point 3. It kind of makes it clear. So you tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them in the body, and then in the summary, you tell them what you've told them. Okay, we covered 1, 2, 3. And it just makes it sink in better in your head, I think. One thing with the slides, and again, I would end with contact details and Q&A. And one thing I've found is if you tell people you're going to have a Q&A at the end, you should do that. Because otherwise, sooner or later, someone says, I thought we were going to have a Q&A. Oh, yeah. So if you say you're going to do it, you probably should do that. And again, leave with your contact information. So think about the content. What is it you're wanting to express? What do you think your audience wants to hear? Why are you here? Why are they wasting 15, 30 minutes of their time? And everybody's time is valuable. What can you add to their day by speaking and giving a presentation? And think about who you're speaking to, because it makes a difference. The same with your time, your limit on time. If you have 10-minute slot, don't have a 30-minute presentation. Be respectful of your audience. Cut your PowerPoint, limit it to what you need to say in that 10-minute time period. And also your audience. Be cognizant of who your audience is. If you're explaining what's GIS, it's going to be a completely different presentation if you're giving it to your kid's second grade class or you're giving it to the CEO and the board members. You need to make your presentation relevant to each of those. I guess it's like a resume. You can have a basic backbone, but you want to specify for who you're going to be talking to. Be prepared. Know your topic is probably the best thing. You'll be more relaxed in yourself. Your body language will show. You will make your audience more relaxed. I don't know that we ever get everything out that we remember, and especially if our technical stuff isn't lining up, you might skip more. But be prepared and practice. One thing is that family is a good ones to practice with. I've found they tend to be very brittle. I mean, honest. They will tell you. If you ask your kid to sit through something, they're going to tell you if it's boring. So if you want an honest answer, ask your family. They'll tell you. The visuals for your presentation, and it starts with your attire. The same as if you're talking to your kids' class or your CEO, if you're trying to talk to or give a presentation to your parks department and you turn up in a 3-piece suit, you might have already made a barrier. You're trying to make that connection with the people you're speaking to and you're presenting to. You may be better in that case to be in chinos. Maybe it's fine. But just to make it so that you're trying to make everybody else comfortable, but present yourself well as well, but make it something that is appropriate for what the situation you're in, appropriate to the presentation and to your audience. Limit the number of slides. There's no magic number, and it would definitely depend on you, and it's up to you to work that out. If I was giving you a presentation on how we do a software install, there might be a whole lot of detailed slides needed. It might be required for that. Your kid's second grade class is going to not be listening, and it will definitely depend on your audience, how much detail you need and the number of slides you need. I did sit in on a presentation recently, and the guy was a slide guru, and he said one thing that is that most of us, we're good in our jobs, but we also do presentations because we've learned how to use PowerPoint. We're not trained at presenting, and that you should not have 10 points on your page, because it's exhausting to your audience's brain if you have 10 points up there and they're reading the 10 points and I'm speaking about point 1, and it makes your audience's brains work harder trying to get them two together. So you'll see with this that I'm clicking through each slide and as I'm adding things, and that's on purpose. Also, your slides should not make good handouts and vice versa. Because this is each of these times I'm clicking is a different slide, and I'm not putting 10 points on one page. If you're doing a handout, you probably want the 10 points on one page because they don't want 50 slides. So it might be useful to have 2 decks, one that you can print off that has the overall information if you want printouts. I didn't do any handouts, so you'll just have to listen. And have a backup. And that is probably why the technology isn't working today, just to prove. So have a backup, have printouts. If you're doing a live demo, save screenshots, because you all know that's the time it's not going to work and the internet's going to go down. So have a backup so you can work through and still provide a presentation. If you are online, be aware of the camera. Ideally, I would be talking to this camera today and looking at my notes. So now I'm just winging it because my camera's here. And if I just was looking at this camera, it seems like I'm not paying attention to you. Well, that's kind of annoying, isn't it? So try and be aware of your camera. The same with hand gestures. I have read before they said you should stand up if you're either way, even if you're on camera. I'm out of order for this because I can't reach my computer, so I'm sitting down. But also make sure your gestures are up in the screen. If you're showing things, you don't show it down here. No, you've got to show it up higher. Just be aware that that's where your audience is and that that's what they're going to see. These are the kind of things, it's just like a map, right? You're looking at colors, what colors go together, what make it the right impact and importance, size and font. It all makes a difference. And then when you're looking at it, you also have to look how it looks on a screen if you're going to be portraying it on a screen. Is it legible? Are the audience going to be able to read? You know, yellow font on a white background is not always legible. And I think, again, we're used to that if you're used to working with maps at all. When you're presenting, focus on eye contact. If you're in a room with your audience, try and remember to move your eyes around the room if you're comfortable doing that. First of all, you just want to get your stuff out. So if watching Tim the whole time works for you, that works as well. Ideally, you can move around and make eye contact with everybody, and that keeps them all visual and focused on you. One thing to remember is if you're in a room and you have the slideshow behind you, well, that's not going to work very well. If I turn around and point at the thing, I've now lost eye contact, and you're trying to keep the audience. So it's better if you can have it behind you and maybe use a screen pointer on the screen in front of you that would show up behind you. Just something to remember. Definitely ask for questions if you want it before or after or during. Just let the audience know what you'd like. And remember your body language. You don't want to be too uptight. So I think really being comfortable is a main point. Practice, practice, practice will help. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you will be. You want your audience to be comfortable, so not being rigid is good. But your body language breaks down into more than that. And we'll go over that in some detail, I hope. I say that. I hope that's right. Your slides and your visuals are important. That's why you've put them together, including your background or the deck that you're using. I don't know that this is the ideal background deck, but it was good enough. And when I asked somebody to sit in, and they're like, no, that's fine. You're overthinking it. Okay, I'll go with that then. It's not that big a deal. This is just an informative session. Animations, this is how we'll see if this definitely comes through or not. It's kind of like when you got a map and they would tell you don't put a plane on there on your map. They can be useful. I recently was doing a presentation for a Toastmasters group, and it was a very dull, not exciting presentation, but it was talking about visiting different clubs, and it was a competition where you had to visit a different club and take on a role. And so there were 9 slides of this information, which is pretty dry. And so it did work. Okay. So one of the things I had done was put an animation like that, which is very minor. And the guy that was evaluating my speech said, oh, thank you for doing that. He said, I normally fall asleep in slideshows, but that was enough movement that it kept me entertained. And it was only a 5-minute speech anyway, so he couldn't be too bored. So I touched on this before. They say stand even if you're on camera, and use your space. So your space, will be the area around you, but you don't have to make tiny little movements like this. You can use bigger movements and gestures and things to bring home your points. Do be aware of, if you use the blurry background, that some things will fade into the background. So that's not necessarily useful if you're trying to show things. You might want a plain background. So, but use your space, and you can move in and out as well to bring home a point that this is something, and that work with that, and it gives you some variation in your speech. Arm movements, gestures, depending on your space. I did want my camera on because I do apparently talk with my hands. I know, because I've already got 10,000 steps for the day, and I actually haven't walked that far. But use gestures, anything to keep people interested, I think. I'm thinking of one really good speech I went to in a conference not that long ago, and I don't think there was a word on the slides. There weren't that many slides. There was a picture, and then they spoke from that and moved, and it was a very entertaining speech. I don't know what it was about. I know who did it, and I would definitely go back and see more of his speeches because it was interesting. And I think that the gestures help. Your face also helps. You can bring home the point or react appropriately. Okay, project, especially if you're in person. I'm assuming Tim hasn't gone like this, so I figure you all can hear me. But definitely project. And this was something that surprised me when I started Toastmasters, because my family would never think I was quiet. I find it's helpful to have somebody at the back of the room that'll let you know if they're having trouble hearing you, because there's nothing worse than doing a speech and then nobody heard anything. So you may have to raise your voice somewhat and practice. I do remember my son coming in one day saying, "Are you reading to the dog?" I was like, well, yes, I am, but it's because I'm trying to project, and I figure that's a good way to do it. And the dog doesn't mind me reading her a story, so it worked out. Other things you can do with your voice: speed. You can alter your speed for sure. Be cognizant, if you are a fast speaker like I tend to be, to slow down, that people may have trouble catching what you're saying, especially if you talk funny like I do. You can vary your tone. So tone is if you're soft like this, or if you're going to be forceful, that's the tone you can change. Pitch is if you're high or if you're low, and then you can change that. Volume, we all know. I'm sure you don't need me to practice or demonstrate volume on you, but these are things that you can use to bring home a point or to enhance your presentation. Humor. I was going to say it's not necessarily appropriate, like if you're at a funeral, and then I was thinking, probably the best funeral I went to, I remember the priest saying that the lady that had passed had asked him if he would be the priest, and he was really touched by it, and she said, well, don't get too excited about yourself, Father. I asked the Pope, but he was busy. And that was at a funeral. So humor can work. You just need to know when and where to use it. Pauses are a great way to bring home a point. One of my fellow Toastmasters is a preacher, and he is great at this. I, not so much, but I'm learning. It's definitely a way to add space and emphasis at a certain point in your speech. So now we're going back to the more basics, the do's and the don'ts. So do introduce yourself and explain why you're the subject matter expert and why everybody should pay attention to you today. Why should you be wasting this half hour with me? I feel like that's respectful to your audience also, letting them know why that you've got something valuable to add to their day. Do say your qualifications. So at this point, I'm a Toastmaster, so that's why I'm here. Know your subject. If you think you have something to tell, know it, understand it. You may not be perfect, you may miss things, take notes, and then you can get back to people afterwards, which I think is a good way to do, and I normally end up doing that because I don't know everything. Get back to the questioner if you don't know the answer, whether that's that you said you do a Q&A or you're going to look it up afterwards and get back to them. You can do that. Fit your speech into the allotted time. If you have half an hour, give a half-hour presentation. That doesn't mean do a 10 minutes worth of presentation and stretch it out over in a half an hour. That's nobody's favorite. But equally, don't put 45 minutes and just talk really fast and hope that they catch it, because that's not going to help anybody either. So do try and fit your presentation into the speech space. Practice words and phrases. If there's a word that you get caught up on, you can practice it. Or you can also rephrase. Sometimes I find that easier if there's a word that I just seem to stumble over. You can utilize humor, vocal variety, and body language to emphasize your presentation. And practice and be prepared on the day so that you're being respectful of your audience's time. Things not to do. Do not read every single word. We've all been there, right? It's just exhausting and nobody enjoys that. If you could just read it, then just send out the presentation and don't turn up at all. That might be a better paper for everybody. Or better still, do a better presentation and just provide handouts if you want. But don't just read every single line, and don't put everything on the slide. Put your points and then talk around them. If you need points, put the points up one at a time, not a whole page of points. Talk about them as they show on the screen. Utilize words or phrases. Don't utilize words or phrases unknown where you are presenting. So if I Aussified this speech and threw a whole heap of slang in here, that also wouldn't be helpful if you don't know what the words I'm using are. And I apologize if I did any of that or spoke Texan, because I've been here a long time, Don't overuse slides and don't underuse slides. You need to go through and be critical of your work and try and work out the right number. If I told you the number of slides here, it would seem ridiculous, I think, to me, that I would have that many slides. But I'm hoping to keep them on time, and I'm keeping the clock going, so I think I'm about on time. If you need more details, put more slides in. If people are going to need to be able to see it and they can take photos, that's a good way to do it. And don't say you'll do a Q&A and then forget. I took one for the team. I've done that, and I'm going to tell you, don't do that. So in summary, we looked at categories of speeches. We looked at informational and narrative speeches as two different topic types. We looked at the content of the speeches, the presentation components, what we want to include and think about in the speeches. We looked at things that we do and we don't want to include in our presentations. You all may have other ideas of things that you think, yeah, you missed something, and please do feel free to let me know. Now, I think if anybody has questions and answers, I think we have quite a few comments, so that's great.
Yeah, we've got comments and questions.
Okay.
So we'll start with the first question from Bruce Jaffe. Please tell us a bit more about the hook. What makes a good hook? Is it engaging to the audience with some questions?
Yeah, I think it could be a question. And I think this is very much up to you, and it also is relevant to your presentation. It might be a question, it might be a quote. It would be relevant to what you're talking about. So, but something I would think, if you heard it, would it make you want to listen? So if somebody said to me, have you heard a really good or really bad presentations before? And would you like to improve on your presentation? Well, yeah, I would. And yes, I have. So that would work for me. So that's why I was using that as an example. So it would depend on what your presentation was on. Something that's going to catch somebody else's attention and make them want to sit and listen to you would be the answer, I think.
Okay, let's hop over to some comments. Amanda just mentioned and just kind of reiterated that if you're going to say you're going to have a Q&A session, please have one. Because I know a lot of folks have been holding their questions till the end. And Timothy Dolan kind of agrees, and he actually suggests that he prefers more slides with less content. He once heard that you should have no more than 10 words if possible. So I don't know if you want, that's just a comment. I don't know if you have a retort or another comment against that, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I guess I think it would depend on what your presentation was on, but that sounds good to me. And if you really know your presentation and you can talk around it and you only need a few words on there, I think that would be great.
Okay. Here's another question from the Q&A section. How do you estimate the amount of presentation preparation do you need? For example, pitch a new project to a department manager who has a limited background.
I don't know, maybe somebody else could chime in on that. I would think guess what I was going to guess and then times it by 3 would work for me as a good start. Because I always seem to underestimate. But maybe somebody else has some input on that.
Okay. Rachel has a nice comment about what she likes she likes your comment about having someone at the back of the room listening instead of asking the question, can you hear them? Because if they can't hear you, they can't hear the question you just asked them.
That's a good point.
So she just kind of acknowledges that that's so it's Tron, it says it's actually an excellent idea. So we have another question. How does talking geospatial differ from other presentations?
It would depend, I would think, on your audience and their knowledge. If you're talking to other GIS people that are well versed in whatever you're talking about, then you would adjust it for them. Whereas if you're talking to the CEO that maybe doesn't know quite so much, you would have to do a broader speech. So I think the difference being that you're judging your audience's knowledge based on how much you have. Are they about the same? Do you need to dumb it down for them? So I guess that would work with any specialty area. What do you think, Tim?
I think that's correct, right? I've heard this often, just know your audience. So whatever you present, and you said it beautifully earlier, is, you can have multiple versions of the same presentation. One is for management, one is for technologists, for people that know that, and then another might be for the second grade class, right? So, but the content or the theme is the same. And I think that's the beauty of all of this. I hope by now that, there's enough tech out there that we can do this, that you don't try to roll the same slides out for every version of this presentation. You'll have to tweak it each time based on what the audience is that you're presenting to.
I agree.
What advice do you have for presenting to leadership, executives, and other non-geospatial experts?
I guess practice with your family, because they're going to be they're definitely going to be a good audience to try it on.
I've got a question about something similar. So you're part of Toastmasters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you have an opportunity to choose what you want to present?
Yes.
Something like that might be interesting. So if you go to an audience that really knows, maybe knows very little about geospatial, and just get feedback on, did any of that make sense to you?
Right.
Then you might have a good idea on how to present to management, executives, things like that.
When I actually did present one on how the town does addressing to my Toastmasters group. Mm-hmm. And then I did one on how to do composting and the benefits of composting. And I got the same evaluator, and his comment was, you don't pick very sexy topics, do you? No, I don't.
Well, addressing is sexy to some of us.
Well, I asked him for a list of sexy topics because that's a bit beyond me,
Okay, the questions keep rolling in. If the goal of the presentation is to showcase GIS specifically, do you recommend using a story map or PowerPoint?
I don't know. See, I like story maps. It's already there for one. If you've already put together a story map and it's all in one place and you can scroll through it. But I also find it, personally, I find it on a screen difficult where you're scanning up and you're not reading everything, and then you're scanning up a bit more. I find that difficult. So I guess it's a personal preference, and I'm not that experienced with the new story maps.
And I think it goes back to, again, knowing the audience too. You know, I've heard recently about movement in slides and how that could be distracting to some that, you know, have a hard time focusing, and to minimize that. And I think, you know, story maps, you know, unless there's a feature where you can just appear the next thing instead of sliding down. I know it looks cool, but sometimes it, you know, so again, you know, you may not know who in the audience has trouble with stuff like that, but you know, maybe it's best to just try to minimize the movement
Right.
in anything that you do, just in case.
That's a good point.
Well, here's one from Patrick. What is your best advice to someone like yourself who has a different accent than most of the audience, and different accent than most of the audience, that best allows you to get to your point, to get your points across? So I guess what Patrick is saying is that since he's a Texan, if he goes to New York, how are they going to understand him?
Yeah,
How do you best
Patrick,
get your
but
point?
no chance. I think if you're going elsewhere, you'd want to practice with somebody from there, because oftentimes my Toastmaster friends will say, "Oh, that's not an expression we use here." And it makes sense to me because I know what I'm saying. But so I would think you want somebody from there to listen to your presentation first, preferably, and pick up anything that's different and slow down. Because you think anybody you listen to that's got a different accent, it's hard to understand if people talk too quickly.
And the other thing might be, like, Nicole, what if you were invited to give a presentation, you know, somewhere else, you know, where you don't really have the opportunity to get to know the community you're about to present at? You know, are there, I guess you kind of said it, just slow down, probably, you know, try to use as common language as possible without any idioms or, you know,
Yeah.
slang, that kind of thing.
Well, now you've intrigued me. I'm going to try and go to a Toastmasters, one of the virtual ones that's overseas. I did one last year, but I went to Sydney. So that was kind of cool that I got to go and talk to my people.
Oh, that's good.
But I could go to somewhere where people speak differently and see how that goes.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. Did they say you had a Texan accent or American accent when you gave your Sydney speech?
Oh, my family assures me they know which one it is, that I sound different.
Well, here's Rachel. Do you have any alternative technical presentation formats besides PowerPoint that you like to use?
I don't, but that's only my limited knowledge. It's not that I'm an expert and no, it's just that, okay, I know how to do this and I can play with it a bit.
I can add to that. I love Miro. I like, you know, a different, like a whiteboard kind of approach. So there's a lot, you know, in fact, I often hear now that PowerPoint, you know, like when a PowerPoint slide pops up, you know, kind of almost gets a groan. Meredith says Prezi's good. I've used Prezi. Again, the movement of Prezis might be, you know, tricky. You know, so kind of keep that in mind when you do things like that. I used to do the Miro that way all the time, where I can just zip around because I thought it looked neat. But I was later told, so Miro has a feature that when you go from slide to slide, it actually just pops up the next slide. It doesn't have that movement or that animation feel to it. There's tons of stuff out there.
And Amanda said, beware of slang, which I guess refers back to Patrick's question about when you go elsewhere.
Oh,
or how you try to be sound less foreign or unable to be understood.
Well, here's Nathan, our Kiwi friend. A couple of thoughts you might want to comment on. Diagrams or maps are perfectly legible when you see them on your screen, but are far too detailed when projected. And I think you might have a comment on it. You know, and I guess the second part of this is if there's a lot of detail and you don't always have You don't always have to cram into the presentation. You can follow up with an email, details, blog, etc. Get the audience interested, and then provide the details later. P.S. Lots of neighborly love from New Zealand. The Aussie accent is bearable, he says.
Cheeky bugger.
Ah.
Thank you, Nathan.
So Nicole and I were talking before this presentation, and we were talking about, you know, when you do things like a map, what it is, what are you trying to convey? You know, I don't, Nicole, if you can kind of answer to, like, if you're trying to show, you know, not just addresses, but maybe like a road work that's being done in a particular area, how would you, what's the best way to present that, let's say, to the public or the citizens?
I would think nowadays online,
Okay.
get more coverage than, and maybe by having a PDF or an interactive map where people could zoom in and see that, you would highlight the area that you're referring to so that that stands out. If it's the road work that you need to highlight also, that within this zone, this is the road that's being disrupted, and then the details on the side maybe. I think it's good to remember some of the basic things from back when we were students on leaving white space, that the space, which is like your pauses, makes it, you're able to emphasize on the points that you're wanting to emphasize.
Very good point. Matt Taub asked another question. Any tips for creating visuals for presentations that are friendly for those with disabilities? Sight, hearing, movement.
I'm thinking that if you're using Esri, that they have some of the color ramps are set for color blind, which is not, I don't think that really counts as a disability. But if you're working with the fire department and they're 90% men, you definitely should be aware that that's an issue. Or if you're putting information out, I guess you want to take that into account. I haven't had any issues with sight, hearing, or movement. But that is a good point, Amanda.
So this might be one of those opportunities that you'll get back with Amanda if you find out any new information.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And it looks like Martin Kim has a question. His hand's up. Martin is one of our eSig award winners, so I've promoted him to panelist to ask his question. Martin, if you're ready.
Sure.
Maybe. He's also speaking at GIS Pro.
Oh, fantastic. And he's on mute, so maybe that's part of it.
All right. Well, he can hop in when he's ready.
Okay, well, I'll go on to Bruce Joffe's question. I enjoy John Oliver's presentations. He tells a story, uses PowerPoint with imagery and a very few words, and keeps the audience's attention. In Toastmasters, have you ever analyzed what makes his presentation so entertaining as well as informative? So is this the John Oliver that's like the TV host, John Oliver? Or is there another John Oliver that we're supposed to know?
That's the only one I know. And
Yeah,
I haven't, but yeah, the TV host. Okay, yeah. I haven't, but now I'm going to go and look them up, Bruce. Thank you for that.
How about you, Martin? Are you with us now? Well, here's a nice use of white space, right? This uncomfortable pause. Well, while we're waiting on Martin, I've got a couple of announcements, EURISA announcements to make. Upcoming programs, we have a GIS Leadership Academy in Denver. It's in November 27th through December 1st. So if you haven't done the GLA or haven't been part of the Leadership Academy, it's fantastic. And Denver looks like it's going to be spectacular. And Wendy, do we have any are we getting close to, do we have enough do we have any openings left? I guess what I meant to say.
Yep, we're about halfway full for the session, and it's always limited to 50 attendees, so we're looking good. And September 15th is the early bird registration discount deadline. So if you're
Perfect.
planning to join us in Denver, try to register before then.
And if you're a ERISA member, you also get a discount too. Is that correct?
For sure.
All right. GIS Pro. GIS Pro 2023 is in Columbus this year, October 16th through 19th. I cannot wait. That's going to be fantastic. I remember I was at the Ezra UC and met and talked to Wendy Peliquin, who said that GIS Pro is her favorite conference. And I just had to go to this conference to see what her favorite, like we're at this conference and you're saying that conference is better, and she's right. This conference is fantastic. It is meant for us as professionals. The final announcements, we have if you go to the ERISA-portal.org or just Google ERISA, you can see the webinar series that's there, webinars and virtual education. The next one on deck is September 13th, Wednesday, accessory dwelling units, addressing and GIS. So whoever thought addressing was sexy, this is your webinar to go to. And don't stop there. It gets sexier with the next generation 911 and GIS, asking the expert panel. That's a week later, the following Wednesday, September 22nd. And we round out the webinar virtual education series of the year with the 2020 Census Content Tour of the GIS Living Atlas. That's Thursday, November 2nd. We got a lot of addressing the sexy here. Okay, well.
There was one more question too, Tim, when you're done.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Somebody anonymously asked, how does talking, oh, hang on, I've missed, that's the wrong one. Somebody asked about if you're interested in joining Toastmasters. If you go to Toastmasters International, you can look for meetings near you. Some are online, some are not online, and look at a time that works for you and send them a message and say you'd like to come and visit. You don't have to be a member to go and visit, and most clubs will be happy for you to come and visit. That's the way I do it, and I've got to visit a lot of clubs lately, and a lot of them I'll do virtually. That I can do it in a lunch hour. I can log off and do a meeting and then come back, and it just makes me more comfortable speaking and going and speaking to people that I don't know, and I've noticed the difference. And it's fun. It's just like GIS nerds. It's just Toastmaster nerds. They're good people.
So you're saying all nerds are great?
Pretty much, yeah. The ones I know, yeah.
Well, Nicole, unless you have anything else to add, what I'd like to ask the audience, those that are still with us, if you can just type in where you're from. And, I think that'll be just kind of a nice, interesting content toward the end, and we can see where folks are checking in from. And unless you think of another question to pop up, thank you so much for attending this. Nicole, thank you so much. I know we had some technical difficulties and you nailed it. So
Awesome.
you did fantastic. It was a great informative presentation. This will be recorded. It is recorded. It will be posted probably in the next day or two. And I believe, Wendy, you'll be getting an email if you registered pointing where you can go back and watch this video. So if you saw something that you needed to hear a little bit more, you can go back and refer back to the video here. Nicole, any parting words?
Thank you all so much, and please feel free to reach out if you think of anything later on that I can help with, or if you want more information about Toastmasters, or if you are a Toastmaster and you can get credit for speeches in Toastmasters. If you have another Toastmaster evaluate, let me know. I'm happy to sit in on anybody else's presentations so you can get credit. We're all here to help each other, and yeah, I would love it if people would reach out if you're interested.
Fantastic.
Thank you for turning up today and listening to me blab for an hour.
Oh, it was so good. Wendy, anything else?
Nope, just everybody have a good weekend. It's coming up quickly, and be safe.
All right.
Excellent.
Bye.
Thank you all.